Welcome to Sneferu's first pyramid. With the long reign of Sneferu, the first king of the 4th dynasty, the most brilliant and creative period began for the construction of funerary monuments in Egypt. Funerary monument design moved from the step pyramid to the smooth-faced pyramid, testament to the evolution of the practices of construction. The first attempt at this design was the Pyramid of Meidum. While Sneferu's monument started as a 7-stepped pyramid, it was later altered into an 8-stepped structure. The final phase of construction saw the steps filled out and an outer casing applied to achieve a smooth surface. The smooth dressing of the walls did not provide sufficient bonding, however, and the outer casing did not rest on sound foundations. As a result, the bases of the 4 outer buttress walls gave way, causing the walls to slide down and collapse. While the Meidum Pyramid was abandoned due to design flaws, it showcased other innovations that would impact all future pyramid designs. As well as the smooth sides, it was the first time a ceremonial pavement was built to the temple of the pyramid. Another innovation was that of the funerary chamber, which was no longer at the bottom of a well, but rather above ground level. This change signaled the beginning of the 3-bedroom system. Welcome to Evolution of Pottery in Ancient Egypt. Excavations all over Egypt have uncovered enormous quantities of pottery vessels of all shapes and sizes. The production of pottery was mainly confined to the outskirts of settlements due to the materials required and to keep the kiln smoke away from inhabited spaces. The function of the product determined the selection of the raw material, its treatment, its form, as well as the finishing of the surface. Pottery was essential to ancient Egyptians' daily lives. It was used in all aspects of life, from the storage of grains and liquids to containers within the tombs of necropolises. The most common pottery was made from Nile silt that resulted in a reddish-brown clay. Limestone clay, which made for more attractive pottery, was only found in Upper Egypt. Early pots were made from pinched or coiled clay. Chopped straw, ashes, and other minerals were added, and the mixture was then smoothed and decorated before being put in the oven. Pots were fired in bonfires or enclosed within a brick kiln. The potter's wheel was utilized during the Old Kingdom. Pottery became smoother and more polished, similar to river stones. It was decorated primarily in red pigment, with the black color achieved by exposing it to smoke. Pottery workshops were attached to palaces or temples, and around the late period, specialized workshops began to appear. Quartzite particles, which created the rich blue or green glazing, became common during the New Kingdom. Mediterranean motifs and tin-based glazing came with the Greco-Roman era. Potsherds could be found anywhere and were the most common canvas for writing or drawing, in comparison to the more expensive papyrus sheets. Named after their Greek description, ostraca contained daily life records, letters, or could be drawn upon. Artists drew sketches for temples and tombs, or simply for leisure.
Welcome to natron. Natron is a colorless salt that was used by ancient Egyptians for food preservation, cleansing products, and glass making. It was also used in the mummification process. Natron is a colorless salt that was used by ancient Egyptians for food preservation, cleansing. During the ceremonial embalmment ritual, the priests packed the body in natron in order to remove all of the moisture. Once the body was thoroughly desiccated, they could begin the wrapping. Natron was mined in Wadi Natron. The main mining methods involved either cutting slices out of the lake bed when it was dry, or raking through mineral-saturated water to gather the mineral salts during the floods. Both techniques are still used today and inspired the team in their recreation of the mines located in the mountains northwest of Memphis.
Welcome to Pyramids of the Middle Kingdom. During the Middle Kingdom era, the powerful rulers of the 12th dynasty resumed the tradition of elaborate pyramidal tombs. For example, Amenemhat I built a funerary complex in Lisht, and Senusret II selected the Elahun site in the Fayum. Amenemhat II and Sesostris III, however, cast their favor towards Dashur. Amenemhat III built a pyramid there as well before moving to Hawara in the Fayum. The plundering of tombs in troubled times prompted the architects of the Middle Kingdom to devise increasingly complicated means of security during construction. As such, while the architectural plans of the Hawara pyramid were simpler than the one at Dashur, the means used to protect it from looters were much more elaborate. Beyond the use of blind passages and concealed trapdoors, the architects relied on a system of stone slabs, which were slid into place at the end of construction. These massive stone slabs were meant to permanently block the passageways leading to the funerary chambers. The kings of the 13th dynasty began building their pyramids at Masguna, south of Dashur, then moved on to Fayum and Abydos. The kings of the 17th dynasty, however, satisfied themselves with crowning their cave tombs with small pyramids of raw brick. The kings of the 18th dynasty gave up the shape of the pyramid as a royal tomb entirely. They chose a mountain with a pyramidal shape in the Valley of Kings and dug their graves there. It was not until the Nubian pharaohs of the 25th dynasty that kings were once again buried under pyramidal tombs. In fact, today, the area of ancient Nubia, modern Sudan, contains a record number of 220 known pyramids to Egypt's 138. Despite their slow decline in use and quality, pyramids continued to fascinate all and sundry up to the Roman era. They remain to this day a symbol of the religious dedication of the pharaohs and the grandeur of ancient Egypt. Welcome to Building Ancient Egypt. Constructed with bricks made of mud, most ancient Egyptian buildings were not permanent. Only religious temples and funerary monuments were meant to stand the ravages of time. For these very important structures, Egyptians used limestone, sandstone, and harder materials, such as granite, quartzite and travertine. These heavy stone blocks were so prized that they were often transported from quarries located hundreds of kilometers away. Limestone was common and easy to extract from quarries on the east bank of the Nile. This particular limestone had marine fossils in it, however, preventing it from being easily decorated and polished. Used as the main building material, the structure would then be finished with a finer limestone that was polished smooth and decorated as needed. Limestone was used for the building of the first pyramids and for most of the religious buildings of the Old and Middle Kingdoms. Ancient Egyptians preferred to use sedimentary rock beds or layers like sandstone and limestone because they were often easier to extract. The common method used to extract stone was the open pit quarry. Stonecutters would find quality stone, shape, and dig it out on site. Open pit quarries enabled many workers to work simultaneously on many blocks, which allowed for better productivity. Workers would draw a large grid directly on the stone's surface, taking care to leave a space between the blocks. This allowed them to isolate the different blocks and create a trench that would make the extraction easier. Stoneworkers used iron chisels for hard rock and bronze or copper tools for softer rocks such as limestone. Removing material between each block created a trench line. In some quarries, that trench was wide enough to accommodate a worker, who would then cut the block entirely on site. For harder rocks like granite, workers cut a series of holes and hammered wooden wedges into them. They then soaked the wood until it swelled and caused the rock to split. The gallery extraction technique was used when the desired rock was buried under layers of rubble. This method was often necessary in order to find the whiter and finer limestone required for a smoother finish. The first step was for the stoneworkers to create an access pit that would allow them to reach the desired wall of stone. Once a wall of quality stone was exposed, workers could then cut out smaller blocks. This pit required a descending platform. Designed like a stairway, it allowed them to free multiple galleries of blocks. To cut the stone, they created a longitudinal kerf or slit, and then cut the rock at a 90-degree angle. The lower side was determined along the geological layers or by using a horizontal cut. Wooden wedges were inserted in the rock and hammered in. Shock waves were then generated using hammers, fracturing the blocks at the seam. To maintain the stability of these mining pits over the course of quarrying, workers would leave support sections of unexcavated rock. In every quarry, dedicated shrines were established to offer protection for the workers. In particular, Serket, the scorpion goddess, was considered a very powerful deity among quarry workers. Every of ancient Egypt included a scorpion charmer who was said to use magical powers to ward off the dangerous insects and keep the workers safe.
Welcome to Domesticated Animals of Ancient Egypt. Agriculture and domesticated livestock were introduced 6,000 years ago. Archaeologists have found traces of cattle, donkeys, pigs, and dogs. Dromedary are thought to have been introduced during the Persian invasion. Pets were deeply cherished in ancient Egypt. Many illustrations of children often include a pet in the depiction. One of ancient Egypt's most iconic animals, the cat, wasn't adopted into their daily life until the Middle Kingdom. Since they were so highly capable of killing snakes and rodents, cats were present throughout every period. However, they only became pets sometime during the Middle Kingdom. Prince Thutmose, son of Amenhotep III, had his cat Tamu laid to rest in its own sarcophagi.
Here.
The earliest reference to dogs dates back to 5000 BCE. They were popular pets as they helped hunters and protected herds. They were closely linked to Anubis, the jackal-headed god. Baboons, monkeys, and even falcons were tamed as pets. Each was mummified and buried with as much ceremony as any family member.
Welcome to rediscovering Egypt. In the 19th century, the increased intensity of tourism and excavations, as well as the outflow of antiquities to other countries, threatened Egypt's archaeological heritage. Egyptians took part in this destruction by ransacking sites for artifacts to sell, quarrying stones from ancient monuments, and removing sebak, ancient mud bricks, to reuse for their own purposes. A major step in conserving Egypt's heritage was taken in 1858, when the Viceroy of Egypt created the Antiquities Service. Supported by a team of foreign scholars, Auguste Mariette exerted an iron grip on the service. He carried out his work across Egypt and into Nubia, intervening on almost every major site. Aware of the necessity of keeping unearthed artifacts in Egypt, Mariette requested a museum be created for that purpose in 1858. This museum was the ancestor of the Egyptian Museum. Gaston Maspero, Mariette's successor, expanded and reorganized the Antiquities Service and instigated laws regulating the export of artifacts. French scholars ran the service until it passed into Egyptian hands in the 1950s. As of the mid-19th century, Egyptology was fast becoming a recognized discipline within both private institutions and learned societies. A French architect, archaeologist, and former researcher, Jean-Claude Golvin, now specializes in the artistic reconstruction of ancient cities and monuments. To date, he has created more than 800 drawings, which include 3 volumes focusing on the reconstitution of ancient Egypt. His work is exquisitely detailed and can be found in books and museums around the world. The team was thrilled to collaborate with Jean-Claude Golvin in order to recreate Egypt for the game. In the 19 exclusive watercolors he created for the team, Golvin used scientific data as the base and then extrapolated to provide a full interpretation of various locations and monuments in ancient Egypt. Both early sketches and fully rendered images were then used by the team as references while building the world of Assassin's Creed Origins. Although ancient Egypt's rich religious culture and its mortuary monuments continue to be investigated, the modern discipline of Egyptology, rather than single-mindedly retrieving impressive artifacts, Egyptologists today focus instead on increasing the body of knowledge. In the past, excavations took place in the field, and while that is still the case today, much of the work on Egyptology now takes place in libraries and archives. Today, archaeology in Egypt relies on an interdisciplinary approach, where traditional Egyptologists are helped by a wide spectrum of scientists from other disciplines and new non-invasive techniques. GPS data, satellite imaging, and ground-penetrating radar allow archaeologists to gain a sense of what lies underneath the ground before excavating. Welcome to the Fayoum. The Fayoum Oasis is an enormous basin in the western desert that formed from the Nile's overflow. As such, it is not considered a true oasis, though it gives its name to the region, which covers Lake Moeris. The oasis harbors some of the oldest archaeological artifacts of the region, indicating that the area has been inhabited by hunters and gatherers since the Neolithic period. The Fayoum Oasis drains into Lake Moeris, which was a large freshwater lake, but at some time became a saltwater lake. In the 12th dynasty, ancient Egyptians redirected the water flow with a dam and dug a supply canal using the lake as their reservoir. Irrigation enabled them to continue growing crops of figs, grapes, and olives year-round. Reed boats, feluccas, triremes, and kerkeros were the most commonly found craft within the landlocked waters of Egypt. They were used for various purposes, ranging from daily fishing, trade, warfare, and travel, to the ferrying of massive stone blocks used to build the great monuments of Egypt. The most impressive pyramids of ancient Egypt date from the Old Kingdom and can be found on the sites of Giza, Saqqara, and Dashur. However, one particularly famous pyramid of the time is located elsewhere. During the Middle Kingdom, Some pharaohs chose the Fayum as their final resting place. One such ruler was Amenemhat III. His pyramid left a mark on the imagination of antique chroniclers. They referred to it as the Labyrinth, mostly due to the vast mortuary temple complex at the foot of the pyramid. Herodotus mentioned that he had visited 12 courts and over 3,000 of its chambers. But he was also well known for being prone to hyperbole. Amenemhat's pyramid was built with a brick core and covered with stone slabs, designed to be impenetrable. The burial chamber, made out of a single block of sandstone, is unique in its design. Richard Lepsius and Flinders Petrie both explored the pyramid site, measuring 385 meters by 158 meters, and identified it as the location of the labyrinth. Their research conditions were difficult, as most of the site had been submerged by the nearby canal. Furthermore, the stones from the complex and the outer casing of the pyramid had been quarried away long ago. Ubisoft decided to give life back to this lost monument and the many crypts that were said to be devoted to the sacred crocodile god, Sobek. Founded during the 5th dynasty, the site was popular during the 12th dynasty under the name of Shedet. During the Ptolemaic era, the metropolis was named Crocodilopolis by the Greeks, in honor of the crocodile god Sobek. During the Greco-Roman era, the Cleruks, soldiers of the Ptolemies, settled there after their military service and expanded the irrigation systems. Irrigation and water distribution tripled the arable land and turned the city into a lush and rich area. 27,000 inhabitants lived in its precinct at its height. The city's location was strategic in controlling the many small waterways connecting to the main canal, and thus the Nile. The region's main cult was that of Sobek of Shedet, a divinity associated with water and fertility, both very important to an area that depended on irrigation. Many local villages had the title Town of Sobek added to their official designations. During festivals, ancient Egyptians recited hymns to Sobek, asking for his divine intervention. Greek settlers and later Romans would help the Temple of Sobek's economy to flourish by adopting the local embalming mortuary rites. Their sarcophagi were beautifully painted and adorned with amazingly realistic portraits. Very similar to the cult of the Apis bull in Memphis, a living crocodile was worshipped within the precinct of Crocodilopolis' main temple. Known as Sobek to the Egyptians and Sukkos to the Greeks, It was reported by Strabo that priests fed it with meat, wine, and honeyed milk. They covered its body with jewels and gold. After its death, it was embalmed and placed within the crocodile's grotto, alongside thousands of other mummified crocodiles. Welcome to Oil in Ancient Egypt. Castor, sesame, and moringa were the source of the most common oils in ancient Egypt. Oil was used for various purposes: cosmetics, medical treatments, nutrition, perfume, athletics, and rituals, to name a few. The team decided to use oil as an explosive to add more gameplay opportunities for the player. Ancient Egyptians originally used castor oil in wick lamps, but also for cosmetics, such as facial and hair treatments. There is mention in some papyrus of castor oil being prescribed to treat constipation and help pregnant women. Castor beans were found in ancient Egyptian tombs as early as 4000 BCE. Castor oil was made by pressing the beans from the plant of the same name. Olive trees were present, though scarce, in ancient Egypt's early history, and olives were mostly imported from Syria and Palestine. Their use and cultivation remained uncommon until the mass arrival of Greek settlers during the reign of the Ptolemies, when demand increased sharply. Olive trees were normally found in the region of the Fayum and the lands surrounding Alexandria.
Welcome to Workers and Transport. Whether workers were employed for the pyramid construction or at the quarries, the government supplied food and housing. Workers for the pyramids and royal necropolises were housed in more permanent villages, such as the famous Deir el-Medina. Quarry workers had more temporary lodgings. All skill levels were needed and utilized, from basic work hands to prepare the gypsum, to brickmakers and sand carriers to skilled stonemasons to shape the blocks. Skilled architects and engineers were employed year-round, while support labor were often farmers who worked on the quarries or construction during the Nile's flood season. The basic laborers were hard-working and versatile. Many may have been farmers who joined the construction during the off-season. Hieroglyphs found in the work villages listed assigned job titles. Archaeological research shows that no food was stored or prepared on site, but instead workers received abundant rations of bread, beer, and meat. These rations were taken care of by an administration outside the village. Medical treatment was also available for those who were injured. While some quarries were close to the Nile, others were located across the desert and required long expeditions. These expeditions were sanctioned by the state. They involved complex logistics and required many participants. Transporting a block by land meant that workers had to overcome the weight and friction of the load. To solve this, they first dug a track in the ground. This path was sometimes reinforced with rails upon which a sled, used to ferry the blocks, would be pulled. Whenever possible, blocks were toppled from a higher elevation onto the sled. Workers then poured water onto the clay at the front of the sled, creating a slick surface to more easily move the load. It wasn't until the New Kingdom that animals were used to tow the burden. During flood season, the Nile was at its largest and deepest, which allowed the transportation of the heaviest and biggest loads. Quarries close to the river had troughs dug out to deliver the stones to the shoreline. Harbors and wharfs situated at the river's edge allowed the transfer of materials and supplies. Harbor warehouses accommodated additional stocks of stone so that they were available for the winter sailing season. The Uwadi el-Jarf papyri detail a limestone load intended for the Khufu pyramid that weighed in at 70 to 80 tons, or 30 blocks. One papyrus is a fragment from a foreman's notes taken while working on the Great Pyramid. It details the transportation of limestone blocks from the Tura quarries to the construction site of the pyramid. The other papyri are shipping logs containing archives of the sailors assigned to sail the Red Sea and the Nile. Stone cargo generally weighed 15 tons per boat, amounting to roughly 6 or 7 blocks per trip. For heavier loads such as obelisks, monolithic pillars, or gigantic statues, larger boats were used. These transports are the ones typically showcased on temple walls. River transportation was the most efficient way to ferry stone blocks between the quarry and the construction site. Blocks were transported by flotillas of several types of boats. The most detailed illustration of transport by river is a relief of Queen Hatshepsut's barge with an accompanying flotilla.